7, verses 1 through 8 is what we're going to start by reading. And before we begin reading these passages of Scripture, we'll pray. Lord, help us to leave our sinful mistakes behind so that we may look ahead with confidence, with the confidence only you can give. Amen. So then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was north of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.' Now therefore proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, 'Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead.' Then 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. And the Lord said to Gideon, 'The people are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And any one of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, shall go with you. And any one of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, shall not go.' So he brought the people down to the water. And the Lord said to Gideon, 'Everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set by himself. Likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink.' The number of those who lapped, putting their hands to their mouths, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people knelt down to drink water. The Lord said to Gideon, 'With the 300 men who lapped, I will save you, and give the Midianites into your hand. And not let all the others go, every man to his home.'" All right, so our first question is Jerubbaal. What does that mean? Anybody remember earlier Gideon was given this name? Yeah, the one who contends against Baal, or let Baal contend against him. It's a title of challenge to the idol, the pagan god Baal. Try to challenge this man. He is the one that the Lord has placed into this world for this battle. And so Jerubbaal is got the name Baal in it. But it's not a name of attribution towards Baal. It's actually in contention to Baal. All right, so we got our first question figured out. Second question, why did God worry about there being too many people in the army? So we've got God himself telling Gideon, the people might boast, saying, "My own hand has saved me." But I also want you to look up these two passages, Deuteronomy Chapter 8 and Psalm 33. All right. So Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 17. It says, "Beware, lest you say in your heart, 'My power and the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth.'" Context. The people are hearing from Moses about how God is going to give them the promised land. So Deuteronomy is Moses' last presentation to the people before he dies and Joshua leads the people across the Jordan. What is Moses and the Lord concerned that the people will do once they arrive in the promised land? Yes, Carl. There was all them. It was all by their own hand. And what's so bad about that? What's the risk of a people taking credit for victories that they have accomplished? They rely on their own strength. Roy? Yeah. And May? They stop thinking about God. And when the next challenge comes, they'll think, "I have all the resources to meet this challenge. I don't need to go to God." So one small victory gives them the impression that they can do the next one without God. And so they become a people that no longer humbly look to God for deliverance. All right, let's look at Psalm 33 and see what that one says. So those on the left know that I am interested if you've got ideas. My gaze is over here. So, Dee Dee, get my attention if you got something to say, okay? All right, so Psalm 33, verses 16 through 19. The king is not saved by his great army. A warrior is not delivered by his great strength. The war horse is a false hope for salvation, and by its great might it cannot rescue. Behold, the eye of the Lord is on those who fear him, on those who hope in his steadfast love, that he may deliver their soul from death and keep them alive in famine. So what is Psalm 33 adding to this conversation about trusting in God? It's not that much different than Deuteronomy. It's very similar. One thing that I think is hard for Christians now is to know, what does it mean to have faith instead of fear? Do I only look to God, or do I look to God's instruments? So the people of Israel would be tasked by God to go into battle. They would have war horses. They would have kings. So it's not that there's a king or there's a horse that is itself a bad thing for the people of God. What can we do? What can we understand about how God works? In Psalm 33 is that there's a king, there's a war horse, but when that becomes the ultimate trust, that's where the danger is. It's not that there's a king that's bad or that there's a horse that's bad. I mean, I love horses. It's when that becomes the focus of expectation. In our own Christian times now, there is this interesting tension in the Christian community of what reliance or trust do you have with science, and what do you do by saying, I'm going to trust God? So there will be these memes and things that are shared. Someone might say, I'm going to have faith over fear. And in doing so, they're saying, I'm going to just put it into the hands of God. That's not quite what God's asking of Gideon. There's still 300 people that are going to go into this battle. There still is going to be a battle. There's still going to be torches, and there's going to be weapons. So how do we explain what it means to have faith when we have instruments in this world to do things? Carl.
Even in my everyday struggles, I know that God has equipped me to handle certain things, but then there are those tasks and those moments where those problems feel way larger than I am, but I know that if I am able to.
So some tasks are going to be bigger than you. You know God has given you instruments, but you need God. Okay. Sometimes we'll talk about first article gifts. So the Apostles' Creed is broken up into in kind of a way to teach it, 3 articles. The first one, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. And we'll look at how God has made me and all my members, all my senses. He's given me house and home, land and animals, wife and children, and all the rest. Dee Dee's remembering her catechism right now. Each one of those things are gifts that God has given to us. And the end of Luther's explanation is, why does he give us these things? All out of his fatherly divine goodness and merit, without mercy, without any favor of me. Yes, Ron? Yeah. So Christians through the ages have always had the wisdom to say, what I can accomplish is entirely through the divine favor of God and not through what I can do in my own hands. And this tension with technology comes up other times as well. In Genesis, the Tower of Babel, there's a key thing about how they're going to build their tower. It said they're going to build a tower to the heavens to make a name for themselves. And then it says that they built it with bitumen and tar. So they don't just use the stones, but they're going to use the tools of technology of bitumen and tar to hold together these bricks. And even there, that itself isn't the bad thing, but it is acknowledgement that they're a pretty talented group. But what are they using this talent for? To make a name for themselves. Johannes Kepler. Is that his first name? I know his last name is Kepler. Astronomer, kind of a big deal in astronomy. Lutheran, you know. We always want to remember who our Lutherans are in history because we've only got a few. But Kepler was asked how he could be a scientist, even then in the, what is he, 18th century? Is he 1700s? All right, so 16th century. So how does he's after Luther because there's some Reform controversy that comes up in his life. But how does Kepler, he's asked, challenge and accept his task of being a scientist and be a person of faith? And he said, I trust in a God that's big enough that I can ask these questions and it doesn't destroy God. And it's that idea that God has given us this mind and this challenge to look at the issues of the world, but to always trust Him to be God. So Gideon has got a challenge. God has told him, your army's too big. People are going to take credit, and they're not going to see me at work in this. So question 3, when is it bad to trust yourself and being self-confident? When is that dangerous? Yes, Terry. When you're a leader. Yeah, that's a good reminder. If you trust yourself and you have too much self-confidence when you're a leader, you no longer have the ears to listen to others and to listen to what God is calling you to do. That's a good one to think of. How do you know when your attitude is the right one? Yeah, when you have the humility to know I don't have all the answers, let me listen to God, let me listen to the people God has placed around me. That ability to be humble and hear what God is doing. Yes, Phyllis. To have another Christian around you that can exhort you, encourage you, humble you, and do everything that you need to know. You're doing it right. Pull back. I need that voice of friends that can do both. And that's where congregations are stronger, is when they've got that kind of relationship among one another. And husbands and wives find that wisdom too. There may be a time when in front of our kids we want to look like we know what we're doing, but there's later times when we get the X's and O's and we say, what do you think? Would Dad do that? And we talk to one another about that. All right, question 5. Why do you think God first sorted out the people who were afraid? So there's multiple sortings, and we want to look at why was the first sorting the whisper campaign of Gideon. So to maybe help answer this question, we're going to go to Deuteronomy Chapter 20, verse 8. All right, so Deuteronomy 20, verse 8 says, And the officers shall speak further to the people and say, Is there any man who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go back to his house, lest he make the heart of his fellows melt like his own. So what kind of guidance does that give to us for why Gideon would have been told by God to get rid of the scaredy cats first? So they don't infect the rest of the army, D.D. adds. Yeah, that fear, well, this is where I start to think of the psychiatrist that comes to the Natural, the locker room in the movie Natural. Christy and I, yes. Do you guys remember the movie Natural? Roy Hobbs, Robert Redford, he's Bernard Malamud's short story gets made into a movie. The team is losing, and so they bring in the psychiatrist, and he is dull and droning on, and he says, losing is like a disease. And the team is just staring at him, and all they really want to do is have fun playing the game, and he's reminding them how sad they are when they lose. All right, next one doesn't have a clear answer. I don't have a simple scripture verse for you to go to. I can tell you what some people have conjectured why is an answer, but the movement of 10,000 to 300. And so you've got the two groups of people. There are those who lap the water with his tongue as a dog laps, and then there's this reference to those who kneel down to drink. And the ones who kneel down to drink are the ones that are told to leave. Before I tell you what I've read, what is a possible answer, let's hear what others may think may be an explanation. All right. So, weak and strong. Which muscles are you using? All right. Yeah.
I come back saying, which ones did God touch the heart? Now we come back to the case of God, foreknowledge, his ability to, God doesn't intervene in history, he writes it.
So maybe it's an act of God already knows, and these are just dividing themselves the way that God has directed their hearts. It's an inner spiritual thing revealed in this mysterious division. And God already knew how many people would be. He was already foreshadowing how the Spartans would meet the battle of the Persians at Thermopylae and have the 300 there. So this is what one person said, is that the ones who kneel are not ready for battle. They do not place themselves in player-ready position. So I had Lucas's T-ball coach said, PRP. He said, all right, I want to see everybody in PRP. And it was player-ready position. And he would always be yelling that because, of course, in T-ball, kids are never in PRP. But that the idea is that those who thought that they had the convenience of being able to kneel and get comfortable by the water were not aware of the challenge that surrounded them. I don't know if I see that, but it's as close to something that I've read. I still am not sure why. It could just be this is how they got to be smaller and smaller and smaller. All right. Let's now read on 9 through 14. That same night the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down, go to the camp with Purah, your servant. And you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. Then he went down with Purah his servant to the outposts of the armed men who were in the camp. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley like locusts in abundance, and their camels were without number, and as the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. And when Gideon came, behold, a man was telling a dream to his comrade, and said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and behold, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and came to the tent, and struck it, so that it fell, and turned it upside down, so that the tent lay flat. And his comrade answered, this is no other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp. And as soon as Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, we're going on to verse 18. And as soon as Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped, and he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has given the host of Midian into your hand. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and put trumpets into their hands, all of them, and empty jars with torches inside the jars. He said to them, look at me and do likewise. When I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then blow the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon. How does Gideon respond to the dream? Yeah, he is in Midian's camp. The Midianites and the Amalekites, who have these numbers that are too numbered to count, they're the ones he's hearing to talk. It's a Figuring out who the pronouns are talking about is a little confusing. But yes, the dream he hears is the dream that's being interpreted inside the camp of Midian. How does he respond? He is pretty excited. Yeah. And as soon as Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshiped. So his first step is praise to God. Then he goes to the people. And so that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. I don't know what that worship looked like. One of the words in the Hebrew for worship is one who bows down. So a person who is in front of a king and he places himself lower than the king and bows down to the king. That word of prostration is sometimes what is translated as worship. And so, you're thinking, does he set up an altar? Does he put on a bunch of garments? Does he light candles? Does he make sure the microphone's on? I mean, what does it mean that he worshiped? I think the most fundamental thing is the humility that he had to know that this dream that spoke about him was actually about God. Because you see, in the dream, the people in Midian, they talk about Gideon, the sword of Gideon, and then they finish by God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp. But for Gideon, it's important that he hears that last phrase. It's God's work. Yes. God is his friend. God is going to cheer him up. Gideon, you've got this. You're good. Sometimes Gideon needs to see it, the hearts of his enemies weakened. The second opinion. Yes.
One other thing's going on. Remember Gideon last week? On the least of the clans, at least in my family, Gideon knows about it.
Midian knows. What Al just said is, last week we talked about Gideon was so afraid that he threshes the wheat inside of a wine press. And God calls him and he says, God, no one knows me. I'm from nobody of nobodies. And now we've got the Midianites are talking about it. It's a pretty impressive move that happens here. All right, now this plan. He's broken the 300 into 3 companies, and they've all got torches that are inside of jars, and they've got trumpets. And let's see what happens. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, when they had just set the watch. They blew the trumpets and smashed the jars that were in their hands, and then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the jars. They held in their left hands the torches, and in their right hands the trumpets to blow, and they cried out, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." And every man stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran. They cried out and fled. And when they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. And the army fled as far as Beth Shittah toward Zerah. Is there like 2 R's in there? Well, that's a strange word. And as far as the border of Abel Meholah by Tabbath. And the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali and from Asher and from all of Manasseh, and they pursued after Gideon. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and capture the waters against them, as far as Beth Barah and also the Jordan." And so all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they captured the waters as far as Beth Barah and also the Jordan. They captured the 2 princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. Then they pursued Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. All right, so what did happen when this plan was executed? So you've got the 300 surrounding the Midianites, and Gideon said, "Watch me and you'll know what to do." It always reminds me in movies, they're like, as soon as I give you the sign, you're going to act. And the people are like, "What's the sign?" And the guy will be like, "You'll know it when you see it." What does Gideon do? They've got a trumpet in their right hand and this torch. And from afar, that torch is going to look to the Midianites like campfires. And so if you have several soldiers around every campfire, they're going to see that trumpet that's going to be leading. How many troops are they expecting a trumpet to lead? A lot more than one guy with one trumpet. So he's given to each guy a trumpet and a campfire. And so when the Midianites and the Amalekites look up, they're going to think that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people surrounding them. And then because it's dark, it's the middle of the night, the middle of the watch, it's the darkest part of the night, they start taking their swords to another. This is one of the things that I've always wondered about battles with swords. How do you keep track of who the bad guys are and who the good guys are? The Midianites and Amalekites did not do a good job. I mean,
This is how even modern armies struggle with, is night fighting.
yeah.
I mean, even the last Arab-Israeli war, there was talk about how the Israelis didn't have really good equipment, didn't have good infrared, and so the question, they ended up with a Syrian tank right next to an Israeli tank, so you realize what happened. Night fighting is the hardest thing an army can do. Ancient armies didn't do it.
No, they did not.
So the idea about, okay, they couldn't form plans like they would have. They couldn't know where their officers were. They had no clue about command and control.
Command and control gets destroyed. It's night. Immediately, command and control is gone. And it says, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the armies. So the 300 that are with the torches and the trumpets get to just watch the Midianites and Amalekites go after each other. And then the army starts to flee, and you'll notice that there's this call out of tribes. And that's going to come up in a little later, because some tribes are upset they didn't get called. And so let's keep looking at what's going on now. Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't have a great explanation for that. Let's look now at chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. Oh, by the way, one Bible study I read said, do you think that the rock of Oreb and the winepress of Zeb were named that conveniently before they got killed at those spots, or was it afterwards? You sometimes, you see this historic spot and it's named that, and you think, how convenient, they had the battle at the Battle of Manasseh or something like that. Right. So one answer is actually that they brought Oreb to a place that he had built for himself, the rock of Oreb, and so his pride is knocked down by being at that place. And the winepress of Zeb, that place where, if you remember, Gideon had to thresh his wheat inside of a winepress. The winepress of Zeb is kind of this reminder that the Midianites had been controlling everything that was going on in the land, and now a place of his command and control is where he gets killed. So it could be that they were called that beforehand. All right, chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. The men of Ephraim said to him, what is this that you have done to us, not to call us when you went to fight against Midian? And they accused him fiercely, and he said to them, what have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Bezer? God has given into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. What have I been able to do in comparison with you? So why were the people of Ephraim upset? Yes? The hunters and fighters, they weren't called into the fight. They weren't called to join in the fight until the retreat had come, and then they get to catch the two princes of Midian. What was Ephraim's real issue? To help us kind of understand Ephraim's ongoing jealousy and sense of no one respects us, let's look at a couple different passages. So the first place we're going to look is Job. So our wisdom literature, you find Psalms and go to the left. That's kind of how I find Job. All right, so this isn't specifically about Ephraim, but it's about that jealousy that happens. So Job chapter 5, verse 2 says, "Surely vexation kills the fool, and jealousy slays the simple." What is one of the gravest things that what is the gravest things that Satan will do to work among us is vexation and jealousy. And what makes Ephraim more susceptible to that right now, and sadness, they don't see the greatness of what has been given to them. And so they are filled with jealousy, not realizing, as Gideon says, "What could I have done in comparison to you? You got to kill the two princes of Midian." All right, let's look at Ecclesiastes 4:4. "Then I saw that all toil and all skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after wind." So what does this tell us about the thing that's going wrong inside of Ephraim? Jealousy and vanity. Rather than seeing the complete thing that God is doing, they see what they didn't get to be a part of. And
Fear of missing out.
yes, FOMO, the fear of missing out, not realizing that other great things can happen and you don't have to be there and it can still be great. We're going to now look at 4 through 13 back in Judges. "Gideon came to the Jordan and crossed over, he and the 300 men who were with him, exhausted yet pursuing. So he said to the men of Succoth, 'Please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian.' And the officials of Succoth said, 'Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army?' So Gideon said, 'Well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will flail your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars.' And from there he went up to Penuel and spoke to them in the same way. And the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered. And he said to the men of Penuel, 'When I come again in peace, I will break down this tower.' Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army, about 15,000 men, all who were left of all of the army of the people of the east. For there had fallen 120,000 men who drew the sword." So earlier we had never known, like when God had this army of 30,000, and then it became an army of 10,000, an army of 300. It just said the Midianites were camped there, or it said their number of camels was too great to count. We didn't know how big the army of the Midianites was. This is the first time we get to hear it. It's big. It was 135,000 when the 300 blew their trumpets and had their torches. So 300 caused 135,000 to fight against themselves and retreat. Gideon went up by the way of the tent dwellers, east of Nobah and Jogbah, and attacked the army, for the army felt secure. And Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them, and captured the 2 kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and he threw all the army into a panic. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres. And he captured a young man of Succoth and questioned him. And he wrote down for him the officials and elders of Succoth, 77 men. All right. Oh, I got to keep reading, don't I, to verse 21. I keep forgetting how big No, I'm done. All right, let's pay attention here. All right, so the people were weary yet pursuing. What characteristic does this show? So the 300 there with Gideon, what are they willing to do? They're going to push through the pain. They're going to continue to contend. And then you've got the people of Succoth and Penuel. Why won't they help Gideon and the men? This feeding of bread to the 300, what is that going to do to the 300? It It's going to make him strong, but it's going to take time. And Succoth and Penuel said, do you have them captured yet? Do you have time to stop? Do I really have this opportunity to feed your army? Shouldn't you keep going? Gideon had said what was he going to do while Succoth and Penuel fed his army? What did Gideon say he was going to do? It's in verse 5, isn't it? Yeah. I'm going to pursue after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. So please give loaves of the bread to the people who come after me, and I'm going to keep going. The people of Succoth and Penuel don't trust Gideon to go in the battle by himself. They say, don't you need these 300? And he's like, feed my army. I will keep going. Feed my army. So Gideon cares about his army, and he's willing to continue to be weary and pursue. And Succoth and Penuel don't trust Gideon.
How do we know that this matter is not just trusting about you being able to also say, maybe they're having doubts and they're realizing this is your army, 300 and they're chasing these 15,000 men. Is it maybe them having doubts saying, how do we know to give up my food and resources to you when you may not win?
Yeah, that's a good point, Carl. That they would be cautious about giving away everything to the losing team, because they may need to be ready to be friends with Zebah and Zalmunna. When Gideon fails, this army that he's chasing comes back to whoever offered quarter and aid to Gideon and his army. So that Succoth and Penuel are reluctant to give aid to a losing team, because then they'll have to deal with the other winners. Gideon's going to be kind of mean here. What does he say he's going to do to Succoth? He's going to whip them with the wilderness and briars. And to Penuel, he's going to knock down their tower. This is, the Bible doesn't really help us to understand any comments about the morality of Gideon's anger or anything like that. Yeah. Right. There's some. Is Gideon? Are we seeing a sign of weakness here in Gideon, or are we seeing a boldness of him caring for his army? And I will keep doing this. It's just not one of those things where you get a lot of parenthetical explanation.
I wouldn't read too much of the eyes. Moses set up the tabernacle,
Yeah.
which is physically impossible.
Right.
And also, Solomon built the temple. I doubt if he cast any bronze. So the eye is me, and everybody was with me. So when Gideon said, I will go, he's probably meaning, let's put some bread in the haversack and we're going to keep going.
Yep.
And this idea that I will do it. Elsewhere we see the singular pronoun describing the leader, but it means the leader and everyone who supports. The bigger problem these guys had, Gideon's faced 100. You went up against them with 300. Do you really expect me to believe that?
Yeah. So Succoth and Penuel may not trust his victory, and may not know how much smaller the army has gotten. Let's look at with a little detail now at how he is victorious against this 15,000. They went up. It says that Zebah and Zalmunna were in Krakor. This is a city, a region that is more in the homeland of the Midianites. So the Midianites and Amalekites had been occupiers of the land of Canaan. And so now Zebah and Zalmunna have retreated back to their own region. And so there may be this confidence that they've retreated out of the land of Canaan. They've retreated out of that area that Gideon and his people had thought was their own. They've gone home. And now that they're home, they think they're safe. But you have Gideon coming, it says, by the path of the tent dwellers. The tent dwellers would be nomads, Bedouin. This would be your Lawrence of Arabia moment. So those of you who remember the movie Lawrence of Arabia, where he comes and he crosses a wilderness that no one expected him to come from to surprise the Turks, I think is who he's battling against. I can't remember my plot of Lawrence of Arabia too much. I just remember he came from a direction they weren't expecting, and it was the same thing with Gideon. Gideon comes from a path of the nomads that no one would come because only the nomads really knew how to get the resources out of that area. But Gideon comes that way, and he surprises them. And so Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them. He captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and he threw all the army into a panic. Why does the army of the Midianites panic? The kings are captured, the princes are dead, and their own home is no longer safe. All right, we're going to now continue reading 14 through 21. Yeah, we can do that. So Gideon captured a young man of Succoth, questioned him, and he wrote down from the officials and elders of Succoth 77 men. He came to the men of Succoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are exhausted? He took the elders of the city, he took the thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them taught the men of Succoth a lesson. And he broke down the tower of Penuel, and he killed the men of the city. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, Where are the men whom you killed at Tabor? They answered, As you are, so were they. Every one of them resembled the son of a king. And he said, They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you. So he said to Jathir, his firstborn, Rise and kill them. But the young man did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a young man. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, Rise yourself and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. All right, why did Gideon want to kill the Midianite kings? What did the Midianite kings do that causes Gideon to not want to show them any mercy? There's this reference to the men of Tabor.
They had killed the Gideon's people, God's people.
Mm-hmm.
When they didn't have to. And he said, if you hadn't killed them, I would not be killing you. But because you have killed them, you're not.
So the Midianites had killed those who were close and dear to Gideon. And they said, we did so because they looked like princes. Flattery. Why does Gideon want his young son to kill these two kings? He wants to humiliate the Midianites, and he also wants to give his son the honor of bringing vengeance against his brothers that were killed. But then his son is too afraid, which is a foreshadowing of Abimelech and what's going to happen after Gideon dies. 22 through 27, you got Gideon and an ephod. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And Gideon said to them, Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil. For they had golden earrings, because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, We will willingly give them. They spread a cloak, and every man threw in it the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, beside the crescent ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and beside the collars that were around the necks of their camels. And then Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city in Ophrah. And all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. So Midian was subdued before the people of Israel, and they raised their heads no more. And the land had rest 40 years in the days of Gideon. All right, so what did the people ask of Gideon? They want Gideon to become a king. And they want it to be a generational kingdom. And Gideon's like, no, we have God for that. So Gideon shows to the people that we must continue to trust in God. Then he asks for the earrings from their spoil. What do you think? Was it a good idea or a bad idea to ask for the spoil? Pardon? Yeah, Achan had taken the spoil back there. It was normal. There's no clear judgment here. I don't have a great answer for this question. It's just what he does is he tries to make an ornament of their victory. And that's what's going to become a snare for him, is that they make this ephod. And this is where I need to explain what an ephod is. Real quickly, an ephod, as it's described in Exodus, is something the priest would wear, and it was a part of the high priestly garment that when the high priest wore the ephod, you knew that he was working in the office. So the ephod was meant to be an instrument of clarity where God was, so that when people would go to the man wearing the ephod, they would know that they're talking not just to a man, but to an instrument of God. And so just as our pastors wear vestments and a stole and a cincture, the ornaments of the office are meant to give clarity to who holds the office and who doesn't. The ephod was meant to give clarity, but what it ends up doing is it becomes, rather than an instrument to see God, the people see the instrument only. And that's why it becomes a snare. And this can happen in liturgy as well. You can have pastors who prance about in their fancy robes and forget that the whole reason for the robe is not so you can see them bejeweled, but so people can identify where the Word of God is coming from in this service. And so that's kind of what's happening here with this ephod.
This might be a parallel that doesn't exist. But the golden calf is there here.
Yeah, the golden calf was they take all the gold.
Specifically the earrings. Now we're going, another bunch of golden earrings, and they end up with them out of an idol.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a parallel.
it could be. Sometimes those happen in Scripture, and you're like, did they mean to do that parallel? I don't always have the answer.
Kind of both there. Take it to it.
Yeah. The next thing we happen, just to finish the chapter, is Gideon dies. And verse 33 says, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. The people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of their enemies on every side. And they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. The people forget. The people forget. That's what happens after Gideon dies. Gideon had thought he had brought such a clear victory that the people would remember. But people every generation need a new voice to remind them of God. Terry? Yes. Why? It wasn't strong enough, no. Which is a reminder for anyone that is in leadership to think that they've built something grand, is to know after they died, what was it built on? Them or a foundation of God? It's tough to know sometimes. Let's close our time with prayer. Lord, let us never fall victim to our own wishes or devices. Keep us humble. Help us to always look to Jesus, who took the form of a servant and became obedient to death on a cross to forgive our pride. Amen. Thank you so much for coming to Bible study. Next week, all the Sunday school classes, the different Bible studies, all are meeting in the sanctuary. We're going to do a sing-along of Christmas carols with some instruction history of the different carols. So you're all invited to come, bring your families, enjoy that time of singing, and to hear some of those histories. God's peace be with you.